Well, let's talk more trade and rising geopolitical tensions. Joining me now is Ambassador Nicholas Burns, former U.S. ambassador to China. He's currently co-chair of the Aspen Strategy Group and a professor at the Harvard Kennedy School. Ambassador, thanks for joining me. So we just heard from Megan Cassala, the president is not seeking de-escalation between Israel and Iran. At the same time, the U.S. seems to be getting a lot of its goals addressed through some unusually aggressive means in Iran right now. What's your read?
My read is that obviously the Israelis had a case to be made that Iran had turned away from negotiations and was speeding towards higher enrichment. So the Israelis did, I think, what they had to do, and that is to begin a process to convince the Iranians to come back to the table. The only question, I think, now for the Israelis, the biggest question is, can they do enough damage to Iran's nuclear facilities in order to make this all worth it? Because it could be a very sustained conflict if that's not the case. But certainly, I think the United States has been right. President Trump has been right to support the Israelis so far. Whether or not the U.S. will push for a cessation of fighting, there's no indication they're going to do it right now. And your reporter in Alberta has confirmed that the U.S. is not going to join a joint statement.
Ambassador, what would be the reason for Israel to stop at this point? Is it a certain level of negotiation, or really is it just a question of wanting to do a certain amount of confirmed damage to Iranian infrastructure and then perhaps talking?
The problem for several decades now has been Iran's attempt to seek a nuclear weapons capability. We have tried, the United States, the Europeans, even Russia and China in past decades, to convince the Iranians to stand down. They did not. There's been 2 decades of negotiations. I was part of that in the administration of President George W. Bush, and those negotiations have not succeeded. Sanctions have not succeeded. And when the Iranians essentially walked away from the negotiations with the United States last week, and then the United Nations issued a report condemning Iran's inability to live by its commitments, the Israelis obviously felt they had no choice but to take military action. And the question is, can they destroy Iran's nuclear facilities to such an extent that Iran could not enrich uranium further and go for a nuclear capability?
Ambassador, it seems the factor here, perhaps that the market is watching, is whether not just this escalates, because it has been escalating, but it seems to be contained to between Israel and Iran. Is there a factor that you expect would cause this to bubble over outside of the conflict between those two countries?
At this point, I don't think so. No, it seems it's a conflict limited to these two countries. It's an intense conflict. It's one of the most serious wars that the Middle East has seen by 2 of the strongest countries in the Middle East. There's no question about it. President Trump has been very clear that the United States is going to stay out of this, stay out of the fighting, for instance, although, of course, we are supporting, I think quite rightly, providing defensive support for the Israelis in terms of air defense.
What role do you expect China to take, given that it gets so much energy resource from Iran and has already spoken out against what Israel is doing there?
The Chinese are taking a very cynical position, as they normally do, on issues concerning the Middle East. They are supporting Iran. They've been highly critical of Israel over the last 4 or 5 days. They're, of course, the major purchaser of Iranian oil exports at a discounted basis. And they also have a partnership with Iran and Russia, in some cases with North Korea, which is very much an anti-U.S. and anti-Western democracy partnership. So I don't think the Chinese are going to leave Iran's side, but neither do I think that China is going to step forward in terms of what a normal great power would do and roll up its sleeves and try to convince the Iranians to stand down. In fact, some of the press reporting today is that Iran is looking for a way to end the fighting, but working actually through Arab countries, not China, to do so.